Hi everyone, and welcome to part 6, our final instalment in the Medics Academy FDocs Guide to the AFP. My name's Anna, and I'm a final year medical student at King's College London. I also work with Medics Academy on their SDocs programme, but that's not the reason I'm here today. The reason I'm here today is because I'm considering applying for the Academic Foundation programme, and I really wanted to pick the brains of some experts about it, people who have gone through the programme before. So I'm absolutely delighted today to be joined by George Miller, and we're going to be chatting a little bit about life after AFP and the opportunities that doing an academic foundation programme can bring. So George, would you like to start off by introducing yourself?
Hello everyone, good evening. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. Yes, as we've said, I did my academic foundation programme at St Thomas's Hospital in London. I've subsequently become an Imperial Public Health Registrar, so I went straight into public health training immediately after the AFP. When I was doing my AFP, was on the surgical imaging AFP at St Thomas's.
So first off, George, I'd like to hear a little bit from you about what you kind of see the intuitive next steps being after an academic foundation program. So say I've gone through the program, I think I want to make research or education potentially my career. What are the next steps?
So this is a really good question, and I think a lot of people, and certainly if anything like me, will go through medical school with a sort of image in mind that the next most important thing to do is to get into the foundation program they want, which means in the location they want and the specialty they want. And it's incredibly hard, I think, to really think a long way ahead of that and take the long view. I think what I would say, I suppose the standard answer is to do an ACF, an Academic Clinical Fellowship, immediately after your foundation program. And the foundation program really sets you up nicely for that. You've got a 4-month head start. Often in most of these places, you'll have a block for 4 months to get all your research writing done, to get some publications under your belt, to be focusing on presentations, winning awards, doing your management skills, and showing that you can teach, which is all the stuff which you'll be judged on when it comes to your ACF. Some people, if they're thinking really in the long view, will start contemplating a PhD and what they want their PhD to be in all that time further down the line, and even think about funding applications and how that will all work. Now, that's not the standard approach, and I don't want everyone who's doing this to think that they need to be worrying about PhDs right now, but it's a good idea to keep one eye on the very long term approach you're planning on taking. Of course, plenty of people go into the AFP and will simply use it as a springboard into their chosen specialty and won't necessarily pursue a rigorously academic-only focused career later on down the line, and that's absolutely fine. Part of the opportunity here is to obviously train you, but the other element is for you to find out what it's really like working both as a doctor and in a clinical capacity as well as a researcher, and having that ability to balance between the two, which can be really, really useful, and this is the opportunity to find out. So that's really helpful as well. So I would view the AFP as an opportunity for you to figure out what you enjoy most, what you can get out of the experience of balancing the two, and whether that's something you actually want to do in your future career. And if you do, this is the opportunity you have to really start making headway, get yourself set up for those application processes which immediately follow, in the awareness that, of course, the AFP is competitive, but the ACFs are often even more competitive. And actually, the fact that you've had this 4-month head start is going to be the absolute, in many cases, deciding factor that will push you ahead of the competition and allow you to get the job you want.
That's great. Thank you so much. And I guess what I'd really like to hear from you as well is we've spoken on previous episodes about some of the projects that you did during your 4-month academic block. Was there anything that you started during your foundation years that you're kind of still continuing with now?
Yeah, absolutely. So in preparation for this chat this evening, I was leafing through my portfolio and I came across this letter, which was written for me by my academic supervisor at Tommy's, and I wanted to make 2 points about it. The first is that, and in partial answer to your question, one of the most important things for you to do at the end of your academic foundation program is find your supervisor, get them to sit down and write a letter confirming and detailing all of your involvement in the projects you've been involved in and the work that you've done. And I mean that not just with regard to your research, but because they've been supervising usually that 4-month block. In some cases, they'll supervise you for a whole year or even 2 years if you're on one of the programs that's once a week or twice a fortnight rather than the 4-month block. They'll know you really, really well, and they often have quite good academic standing. They may be a professor, they may be a senior lecturer, and their voice really matters. And having a letter from them confirming everything you've done and giving a reference for you, getting it done then and there whilst they have you at the forefront of their mind is a really useful focus. I'd say make sure you do get them to write something at the end of your rotation. The other thing I'd say, in terms of what we were doing, when I was reflecting on this letter, I found it quite strange now, looking at the work which I managed to get completed. It's a wonderful thing having that freedom to think, to have the flexibility to start working on new projects you're really fascinated by, or complete those ones that have been stuck at the back of your to-do list, which you haven't been focusing on, but you know you would if you had the time. In terms of what I'm still carrying on, so of course there are a few bits and pieces that we couldn't complete. And the really nice thing about doing the AFB is you'll get quite close to your research team, and they'll give you opportunities, you know, honorary clinical fellowships or research positions at the university later on down the line, so you can keep having that input with the institution, which is really helpful. To give one example, so St Thomas's is developing a, well, pretty much world first virtual simulation suite for surgical operations underneath one of its wings, which is a £10 million project. It's going to be focused on for many, many years. And the idea is it's going to be a sort of gold standard research opportunity to try and really rigorously assess how different surgical operations work and the human factors inherent in surgical errors. And that's a really long range project that I got involved with when I was first doing the AFP, but that's going to be sort of a 5 to 10 year project which has lots and lots of publication opportunities coming from it. So I'd say that in terms of the long view, there are really two opportunities to take advantage of. One is get involved in one of those long view projects with lots of funding involved and lots of publication opportunities ensuing from it, ideally in a specialty you're interested in, number one. And number two, make sure that you are competent, reliable, organized, helpful with your colleagues, because they will probably give you an honorary position at the university, which is obviously excellent for your CV, but also will spring new opportunities going forward.
Wow, it sounds like you really got a lot out of your 4-month block, George. And I think we've talked quite a lot about the publications that you got out of it, and a lot of the kind of CV points and stuff. But I'd be interested to hear from you as well about how, like, were there any other areas of like personal and professional development that you found during the program that have been useful for you now?
Absolutely. So I think there'd be 2 points I'd make about that. One is you are going to get really close to the other doctors on the AFP program. It's kind of like a sort of mini year group at school, in that you'll know these people for 2 years. You'll be meeting up regularly. Like, we had teaching sessions at least once a month. And there's something lovely about that. In this sort of slightly fragmented rotations that we have, where we switch every 4 months, to have a sort of consistent year group going through the first 2 years is actually a wonderful support network and sort of social hub for you to be connecting with. And if I'm honest, obviously I've made really good friends in my F1 and my F2 and my time in public health, but one of the groups I spend most of my time with, and we're still really, really close, is this AFP group, because we all came from a similar perspective on medicine. We were all trying to get to a sort of similar destination. We all got on incredibly well, and I think, generally speaking, I found that my colleagues in the AFB were really interesting people who had interesting ideas and were very clear about what they wanted to achieve, and that was quite inspiring to be around. So I think partly there's the social element, partly, I suppose, just being able to bounce ideas off each other with other young clinicians who are equally passionate, who really like research. That's pretty exciting too. Beyond those things, I think when it comes to what I got out of it, it's really hard to overstate the value of having 4 months to just think and just slow down and consider what you want to do and where you're going and what work you want to achieve. It's actually quite rare. And I don't know if you found this, obviously already in medical school, but certainly for me, I found a lot of my sort of intellectual bandwidth was taken up by clinical medicine or by my studying for my exams. I found it sometimes quite hard to be able to sit down and read maybe a paper I was interested in, or sit down and just think about something which I'd been considering in terms of research idea, because you're so tired from all the work you've been doing. So I really can't say enough, just having that 4-month period to really reflect, consider what you want to achieve and do is incredibly valuable. So social side, reflection side, and then the third thing I'd say, and this is really important, the opportunity to revise for your exams, your postgraduate exams, when you're not trying to balance it around all your clinical commitments, an opportunity to really prepare properly for interviews, because if you time your research block properly, you can time it at the same time as your interviews, gives you such a huge advantage, because rather than coming off nights or struggling to get annual leave for that interview day, you can really tee it up. You can be prepping yourself rigorously in that week beforehand, and you can walk in refreshed, ready, top of your game to get that job you want. And certainly that's exactly the experience I found in terms of getting my first choice job later on down the line for surgery and for public health. So that's an incredibly powerful and supportive moment as well.
Yeah, definitely. That really resonates with me, the sort of breathing space of not doing clinical medicine. I had a year out of clinical medicine last year, and that was definitely one of the biggest things I took away from it, was just having time to, yeah, exactly as you said, to think. I guess my last question is something that I wondered if you had any thoughts on. What would you say to people who got to the end of their academic foundation job and thought, do you know what, actually, research isn't for me, it's not something that I really want to make part of my career? What would you say to those people?
Well, that is very common. So of my various friends who did the AFP, only a handful of them have gone on to do ACFs. For many of them, I think what they realised doing the AFP was that they absolutely love research, but they love patients enough. And this is quite a lovely thing, really. They love patients enough that they actually did want to spend the lion's share of their time seeing patients. But they'd use those skills that they gained in the AFP to improve the research they were doing, make sure that the work they did have time to do was as robust as possible and as rigorous as possible. So I think, partly you should see this as an opportunity to figure out what you really want, because actually no one wants you to be rushing yourself into an ACF because you feel you have to, and then find out halfway through halfway through your PhD that this isn't for you. It's actually really useful to find out one way or another whether this is the right career path, and it's so much better finding out sooner rather than later. So actually that's a useful opportunity from the AFP, and it's also inevitable. When having spoken to the deans who are responsible for running the AFP, they know that this is part of the process, and it's something which they actively want to encourage, because they know even if you don't pursue a very thorough research career, they know the research you will be doing is going to be better for having been involved in the AFP in the first place. I think what I'd say is, amongst my friends and my colleagues who did the AFP, pretty much all of them had an interest in research when they went in, and left with interest in research that was emboldened and amplified. But many of them didn't then decide that what they wanted was a research career, and that's absolutely fine. But I think, broadly speaking, no matter which path you take in the NHS in the next 10, 15 years, there's going to be a research component if you want to get the jobs in the specialty you want, in the area you want. And therefore making sure you're getting a lot out of the AFP, learning how to do research well, and the research you're being required to produce is of a much better, more rigorous quality, is a really useful thing.
Great. Well, thank you so much for joining us again, George. I think everyone who's watching will agree that this has been a really great way to kind of round off our AFP mini-series. And I know that you've also produced a specific Getting into the AFP programme course for Medics Academy, is that right?
That's absolutely right. So we've got, I think what I'd say is that most of my friends and colleagues who've gone into the AFP had the benefit of meeting a few people beforehand who gave them a lot of advice on how to approach it. The reality is actually there are quite a few relatively straightforward steps you can take, because inevitably in the end it's not about some highfalutin incredibly advanced technique. It's really about doing the basics well when it comes to the interview, and you can learn a lot, I think, from just having some straightforward advice. So yeah, we produced a series of talks to detail everything that you need to know, really, in terms of approaching the interview.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much for joining us, and thank you to everyone who has watched all 6 of the AFP mini-series. So if you're someone like me who's a final year medical student who's thinking about going for the academic foundation programme, or even if you're a bit earlier on in med school and you just want to know what it's all about, do check out the AFP resources on the Medics Academy website, which is www.medics.academy.
Hi, so my name's Zaid. I am an F1 in West London, and I just completed the Medics Academy Training and Teaching Day 3 course.
I think it's structured in a really nice way with a lot of resources you can permanently access. The course isn't over after 3 days. You've got a ton of online content that you can always revisit, and I think that is fantastic.
I thought it was a great way to learn through having a full day at the start and then 2 later days of self-study. It really allowed for flexibility and allowed us to fully engage in the course.
It also made me feel better prepared to deliver teaching remotely or digitally.
It's really interactive. There's a lot of small group feedback session, exchanging ideas and learning people's perspective.
After actually doing this course, I realised that teaching is more of a science, and it's really important to get clear feedback so that you can improve your teaching.
This course also encouraged me to think thoroughly about what my audience actually wants from my teaching session, and also how I can keep them better engaged.
Really great and fantastic to get such fantastic lectures from experts in the field throughout the 3 days. It was also interesting to learn from others taking part on the course, because we all have different levels of experience, so it was interesting to gain their perspective on things too.
I learned not just about a different style of teaching, I also learned about what is medical education, how to build a career in medical education.
Overall, I learned a lot from the teaching course.
I think it's a really well done course.
I really enjoyed it.
And I really found it very enjoyable.
That's what I thought of the whole course, and I really enjoyed it, and I would recommend it to other people.
So thank you for letting me participate.